I call this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 14 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Public Safety and National Security. We will start by acknowledging that we are meeting on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin people. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of November 25th, 2021. Colleagues, I don't have to read about all of the public orders and the way we keep our distance. We wear masks when we are not speaking. Staff wear masks at all times, please. And we will run the meeting as efficiently as we can. Members will be participating virtually, and they may speak in the official language of their choice. Interpretation services are available for the meeting. You have the choice at the bottom of your screen of either floor, English, or French. If interpretation is lost, please inform me immediately and we will set it right. And when speaking, please speak slowly and clearly. Should any technical challenges arise, please advise me. Pursuant to Standing Order 108, brackets 2, and the motion adopted by the committee on Tuesday, February 15th, 2022, the committee is resuming its study of the occupation of Ottawa and the federal government's response to convoy blockades. With us today by video conference, Commissioner Thomas Carrick of the Ontario Provincial Police, Deputy Commissioner Chris Harkins, and Chief Superintendent Carson Party. From the Ottawa Police Service, Steve Bell, Interim Chief, and Trish Ferguson, Acting Deputy Chief. Welcome to all of you. Up to 5 minutes will be given for opening remarks, after which we will proceed with rounds of questions. Interim Chief Bell, I now invite you to make opening remarks of up to 5 minutes. I have this little fancy-dancy sign here that says 30 seconds on it. That will be your only indication of how much time is left. As people know all too clear, I am a stickler for starting on time and ending on time. So, Chief Bell, the floor is yours. Please proceed.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I share your passion for well-run meetings, so thank you for that. Distinguished members of the committee, I'm pleased to be given this opportunity to meet with you today.
Sorry, we can't
Joining
hear.
Me today.
We're going to need more volume.
I should really turn my thing up.
Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
You have to turn this up. Yeah.
So how is the sound now for you?
It's a little bit better, but we need a little bit more still.
So I can speak more
That's
loudly
good.
if that
That's
is,
good.
Is that better? Okay,
Much
I will
better.
try and speak more loudly.
Okay,
Perfect.
thank you.
Very much. Distinguished members of the committee, I'm pleased to be given this opportunity to meet with you today. Joining me today is Deputy Chief Trish Ferguson, who is the operational lead for the successful resolution of the illegal protest. We're here today to answer questions about the illegal protest that occurred in Ottawa between January 28th, 2022 and February 20th, 2022. As the police service of jurisdiction in the nation's capital, our members are well practiced in keeping the peace during demonstrations. Every year, hundreds of protests occur in our capital. Our officers are trained to maintain the safety of both demonstrators and the public at large. The vast majority of these protests are peaceful and lawful, and protesters return home when their point has been made. This unlawful protest was unprecedented. The protesters brought thousands of vehicles to our city with the full intention of disrupting our capital. After they arrived, many chose to stay and were clear in their words and actions that they meant to do damage to our community. Our police service received regular reports of intimidating and threatening behavior towards residents on a daily basis. We had reports of hate crimes being committed and willful disregard of police and court orders. The protesters used their vehicles as a tool to back up their behavior, honking their horns and racing dangerously around the streets of the downtown core. Despite our attempts to negotiate, threats of investigation and enforcement, the illegal and disruptive behaviors continued throughout the protest and became elevated on weekends when more protesters would arrive. Our response as a police service, along with our many partners, was to work to safely manage the disruptions, contain the behaviors, and negotiate the protesters out. In the early days, we were able to ensure that no serious injuries, death, or damage to infrastructure was committed. But that's not the standard of policing any resident of our city or any Canadian would expect. As a police service, we understood quickly that we needed assistance from all levels of government in the form of legislative powers and policing resources if we were to safely remove this unlawful protest from our streets. It's important that this committee understand and appreciate the negative impacts this behavior had on our entire community, our businesses, and especially the impacts on our vulnerable, marginalized, Indigenous, 2S LGBTQAA+, and racialized communities. Our center town is a diverse, proud, and vibrant place. But during the protests, we saw clear signs of hate, like swastikas, anti-government sentiment, and leaders posting threatening language on social media and other various forms of social disorder. It shook our community's faith and confidence in the ability of police and government to keep them safe. We've seen the same effect in cities like Calgary, Windsor, and Coutts, Alberta, where similar protests were being held. Our goal from the outset was always to remove this protest safely. In order to do that, it required the careful coordination between all of our policing partners to develop a strategy that would ensure a safe resolution. All three levels of government responded with legislative measures that aided our strategy. I want to thank the City of Ottawa and the Ontario government for the changes it brought forward. And I also want to thank the federal government for invoking the Federal Emergencies Act. From a policing perspective, the legislation provided the OPS the ability to prevent people from participating in this unlawful protest, restrict people from traveling to any area where the unlawful protest was taking place, secure protected places and critical infrastructure, create and maintain the secure area to prevent people from violating the act and safely remove people who were attempting to do so, go after the money funding the protest, and require third parties to assist us in removing the heavy vehicles that were clogging our streets and creating a safety hazard. It was a critical piece in our efforts, but it was only one piece. Another critical piece was the rallying of police resources from the RCMP and the OPP and police services from across Canada. I want to thank them all for their support. As you saw, once we had all of those authorities and those resources in place, we were able to implement a methodical police operation between February 17th and February 20th with an integrated command led by the Ottawa Police Service, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, and the Ontario Provincial Police to safely remove the protest. In total, there were 230 arrests, 118 people criminally charged with more than 400 criminal counts. Hundreds of provincial offense notices were issued. There are cases that are still moving through the courts and multiple investigations are ongoing. There is no doubt in a democracy such as Canada that a discussion and assessment on the appropriateness of the invocation of the Emergencies Act that provided police broader powers is important. I am pleased to be here to contribute to that discussion. I can tell you that police chiefs across the country are watching this discussion because they know that similar situations could or are occurring in their jurisdictions. I've spoken to many of them who have sought out advice. Finally, I want to reiterate my pride in all of the police members who worked on this operation, including the members who came from across Canada to assist us. This was truly a Canadian effort, and it showed the vital role police play in maintaining our democracy and keeping our residents safe. Deputy Chief Ferguson and I look forward to answering your questions today.
Thank you very much, Interim Chief. Now I would like to call on Commissioner Thomas Carrique. Sir, you have 5 minutes for an opening statement. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, Chair, Vice Chairs, committee members. I'm joined here today by Ontario Provincial Police Deputy Commissioner Chris Harkins and Chief Superintendent Carson Pardee. Under the Ontario Police Services Act, the OPP has a unique dual mandate, providing frontline policing services to 328 municipalities across the province, as well as providing assistance and/or specialized support to municipal services upon request. As it relates to the Freedom Convoy and the associated illegal blockades in the city of Ottawa, the OPP's Intelligence Bureau commenced reporting to our policing partners on January the 13th, 2022. As of January 22nd, daily intelligence reports focused on the convoy headed to Ottawa and the anticipated protest movements across the province. The intelligence reporting was shared with more than 35 Canadian police, law enforcement, and security agencies. As the convoy crossed over the Manitoba-Ontario border and traveled across the province until it arrived in Ottawa on January 28th, OPP officers professionally fulfilled their duties without incident. In support of the Ottawa Police Service throughout the occupation, an increasing number of OPP officers and specialized resources from various services became engaged, ultimately contributing to an integrated plan and the establishment of a unified command. Simultaneously, as members responded to many other convoys and demonstrations that consistently and repeatedly emerged in communities across Ontario, including but not limited to the critical blockade of the Ambassador Bridge, the blockade of Highway 402, multiple other attempts to block Canada-US land border crossings, and demonstrations that posed a risk to the area of the Ontario legislature. In addition, from day one, when the convoy entered Ontario, we were responsive to requests from assistance from other municipal police services. This was a provincial and national emergency that garnered international attention. In response, the OPP and more than 20 other police services from across the country worked collaboratively to address public order emergencies that were unmatched in recent history. Protests and demonstrations are often complex in nature. The role of the police remains that of protecting the public, upholding the law, and keeping the peace. The province's critical infrastructure and highways regulation under the Emergency Management and Civil Protection Act and the Federal Emergencies Act were effective supplementary tools needed to help protect critical infrastructure and ensure the continuous and safe delivery of essential goods and services, while at the same time maintaining, or in the case of Ottawa, restoring peace, order, and public security. As the committee is well aware, in addition to the critical events experienced in Ontario, the illegal occupation in Ottawa was accompanied by numerous other high-risk Freedom Convoy-related protests and blockades across Canada. The OPP worked collaboratively with the Ottawa Police Service, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, and other policing partners to develop a sustainable, integrated operational plan that was informed by best practices from other high-risk critical events, available police resources, along with other concurrent and emerging operational requirements in a number of police jurisdictions. Sufficiently trained public order officers were amassed from throughout Canada and deployed in an integrated, strategic, and measured manner, which resulted in the collapse of the occupation. This situation and the associated events simultaneously taking place across Canada required unprecedented national collaboration to prevent injury, preserve life, and protect critical infrastructure. As the Commissioner of the Ontario Provincial Police, I'm extremely proud of the remarkable professionalism and dedication of the officers deployed to Ottawa and the other high-risk events simultaneously occurring across the province. Despite all the challenges, while the entire nation watched live, our officers and those from a multitude of other Canadian police services remained committed to their roles and responsibilities and represented the entire policing profession with the utmost professionalism, discipline, and competence. Thank you, merci, make wedge. I look forward to answering any questions you may have of the Ontario Provincial Police.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. We appreciate your opening remarks. Colleagues, I'll now open the floor to questioning. Mr. Lloyd, you are first up for a 6-minute round. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Interim Chief Bell, my apologies. In Ottawa, during the protest clearing operation, were any loaded shotguns found in the trucks of protesters?
Mr. Chair, what I can indicate is throughout the protest, we did receive information and intelligence around weapons and the possession of weapons by people that either had attended or intended on attending the occupation. As a result of the clearing, at no point did we lay any firearms related charges, yet there are investigations that continue in relation to weapons possessions at the occupation.
I guess yes or no, Interim Chief, were loaded firearms found in the trucks during the protest clearing operation? Yes or
So
no?
as I indicated, Mr. Chair, there has been no charges laid to date in relations to weapons at the occupation site.
It's just a clear question, Interim Chief. Like, were weapons found? Like, were loaded firearms found? Yes or no?
So in relation to, no, not
Okay.
to relating to any charges to this point.
Thank you, Chief. That's very illuminating. On March 19th, this past Saturday, a reporter, Justin Ling, wrote in the Toronto Star, quote, that police sources indicated that loaded shotguns were found in trucks at the Ottawa protest. Is this false information?
So I'm unfamiliar with the quote you're referring to, but as I indicated before, we received intelligence information, continue criminal investigations, and no charges have been laid to date in relation to firearms.
But the article claims that a police source told journalists that loaded shotguns were found in trucks during the protest clearing operation, and you have said to this committee that that is in fact not the case, that loaded shotguns were not found in trucks during the protest clearing operation. Is that the case, Interim Chief?
So thank you for the question. Mr. Chair, as I indicated, we received intelligence information. I'm unclear around the source information that was received for that article or the corroboration around it, but we have not laid any
Today,
charges
Interim
to
Chief,
date
that-
in relation.
Can you clarify, Interim Chief, speaking on the record, not off the record, that loaded shotguns were not found in the vehicles during the protest operation? Can you confirm that?
So yeah, consistent with my answer previously, yes, I can confirm to date.
Thank you.
No charges have been laid.
If there had been firearms found, would the government have been made aware of that, as far as you know? Would the cabinet have been made aware of that if there had been firearms found?
Well, our normal course of action would be that we would conduct an investigation and charges would be laid. And as a result of those charges, there would be public notifications of those charges. We wouldn't specifically notify any level of government as to the course or the conclusion of any investigation.
But they would have been immediately aware if you had found firearms, correct?
So there would have been public notifications
Okay.
made.
So we had a cabinet minister, the Minister of Crown Indigenous Relations, Mark Miller, retweeted that article from Justin Ling from the Toronto Star, claiming that there were loaded shotguns found in trucks. This is misinformation, Chief, and I submit to the committee. Misinformation being spread by a journalist and misinformation being spread by a member of this government. And I'll just close my remarks and give my time to Mr. Shipley. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Interim Chief.
Thank you, Chair. And first of all, I'd like to thank all the witnesses who are here with us today. I witnessed firsthand what went on here in Ottawa, and both your services in very trying times. I spoke to many of the officers out there, handled themselves in a very professional manner. I'd first like to direct a couple of my questions to Commissioner Carrick. Hello, Commissioner Carrick. I understand we have some mutual acquaintances. My questions today are based on, I had the opportunity to speak to two previous commissioners of the OPP as this was going on, trying to get some information. And one of them told me an interesting statement that you will never find a police service that would turn down additional powers. Would you agree with that statement, Commissioner?
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. I would like to know the context of the statement. I don't know that we are in a position to turn down additional powers. We utilize the laws that are provided to us. We do so in a judicious manner and consistent with the Charter of Rights and Freedoms.
And thank you for that. Yeah, I'm not giving you all the details on that, so I know I kind of put you in the spot. It was around, obviously, the Emergency Measures Act and how that could and help some services, because also through those discussions with those two past commissioners, they both felt that the Emergency Measures Act was not required in clearing this. Could you elaborate on that? Do you agree with your past predecessors on this?
I can say that the Emergencies Act was an extremely valuable tool. This was identified as a threat to national security, and we were able to utilize a number of the powers in the Emergencies Act, specifically prohibiting people from attending designated areas, limiting the presence of children, which created a significant public safety risk, compelling service providers to assist with the removal of vehicles that required heavy tows, providing indemnification for those service providers, and the freezing of accounts. These tools made our operation very effective, and in the absence of having those tools, we could not have been as effective as we were.
Thank you very much. I would now like to invite Mr. Noor Mohammed for 6 minutes of questioning. Sir, over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'd like to thank both of you for being with us today. I'd like to start with Interim Chief Bell. Thank you so much for your opening comments. I think they were important for all of us to hear. I just want to clarify something that was asked of you, and I know my colleague, Mr. Lloyd, is not here, but I think it's important for the record. Just to be clear, you had said that there had been no charges laid to date related to firearms. Is it possible that charges could still be laid related to firearms?
So, Mr. Chair, thank you for the question. We don't specifically comment on the progress of ongoing investigations. As I indicated in the answer, information and intelligence was received prior to the demobilization of the demonstration around the existence of firearms within the footprint. Investigations relating to weapons offenses continue, and upon the completion of them, we'll be able to provide information if there are ultimately charges laid. But to date, there has been no firearms-related charges laid in relation to our takedown.
Thank you. There has been, as you know, a lot of interest across Canada in what happened in Ottawa. And many of us receive emails from people with information about how they believe things went down in Ottawa. So if you'd indulge me, I have a few questions that I just want to ask you, just to clarify things that you had said in your opening statement for folks across the country so that there isn't misinformation about what happened in Ottawa. Would you classify what happened in Ottawa as a peaceful, unobstructive protest?
Mr. Chair, so as I indicated in my statement, no, I wouldn't. We quickly, as the protest demonstration unfolded, identified it as an illegal occupation of our streets. Beyond our own observations of it, that was by far and large the sentiments we were receiving from our community, that the activities ongoing within the streets were extremely disruptive and made them fear for their own safety within their communities. So no, I do not believe that this was a lawful demonstration within our streets, and for those reasons we took the course of action we did to ultimately remove them.
Interim Chief, just to clarify again, for folks that may not have heard your statement, were there multiple reports of allegations of hate crimes?
The existence of undesirable, intolerable, criminal behavior that the residents of our city were subjected to are well documented through the course of our investigations and through the course of the unfolding of our dismantling of the occupation. What I can tell you is all through the occupation, we had conversations with our community where they demonstrated and identified and reported incidents of hate-based crimes and incidents that they were experiencing within their streets. We continue to investigate those. We continue to look at the community healing and reparation that we know needs to go on within our community based on the intolerable circumstance and behaviors that they were subjected to.
Thank you. You know, people had been told that there had been reports of visible minorities, of Indigenous people, of women, of vulnerable communities, being harassed, being made to feel unsafe, and they were told not to worry because this was a peaceful protest. Do you believe they had reason to worry?
So, Mr. Chair, I think it's a very interesting question. And I don't think I'm the one properly situated to answer it. What I could tell you is the experience of the community members that we spoke with experienced that. They felt unsafe in their communities. They were terrorized by activity that occurred in interactions with them relating to people that were present in and around the occupation. They experienced incidents of hate and biased crimes and biased incidents in their interactions. So their very real, very relevant experiences are exactly that they felt unsafe within their own communities.
So, Interim Chief, as you reflect on what happened, as you reflect on what was going on, and having heard from your community, how did you feel when you saw political leaders encouraging or supporting the blockade and defending the actions of those that were occupying your city?
Mr. Chair, my focus throughout this was to work with my policing partners, and I would like to publicly thank Commissioner Kariq, Commissioner Lucky for their amazing support that they provided throughout this. When it came to our interactions with our various levels of government, our sole focus was around looking at how we identify accessing the resources and supports that we need, and how we look at leveraging the adequate tools, including the legislative changes like the Emergencies Act that we ultimately received. So when it came to the political and government operations, that is where our sole focus was.
We have a very short amount of time left. So I'm going to ask you two very quick questions, and I'd really appreciate your answers. A lot of folks said that the protest only became illegal after the Emergencies Act was invoked. Could you share your perspective on that very quickly, and share if, in fact, laws and statutes were broken prior to the Emergencies Act being invoked? Could you also confirm or deny that, quote, a large number
Sorry,
of...
he's only going to have 10 seconds to answer both.
And could you confirm your perspective on whether the Emergencies Act was needed or not?
Time's up. Time's up. Sorry. I'll give you 10 seconds to answer it, Interim Chief.
That's a challenge. So the unlawful activity progressed throughout the course of the occupation, from the time that people did not leave what could have been a lawful demonstration to ultimately our takedown. Lawful activity was observed, documented, and prosecuted.
Thank you very much. Now call on Ms. Michaud to begin her 6-minute question slot. The floor is yours.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Merci aux témoins pour votre présence. C'est très apprécié.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the witnesses for being here, and thank you for the work that you did. I'd like you to thank your officers on our behalf. You put in place an operation to remove the protesters. We saw them for a few weeks over the course of the time on the Hill. Why didn't the operation take place earlier? Why did it take so long for the operation to be put in place? And I'd like to draw a parallel with what happened in Quebec City, for example. When the information came in that people were heading to Quebec City to demonstrate outside the National Assembly in Quebec, the mayor of Quebec, the premier, issued warnings, stated they wouldn't tolerate any action. The police blocked access to Parliament and the surrounding streets. There were police stationed everywhere throughout the city, close to the Legislative Assembly, from the provincial police force, the city police force. So when it comes to your participation, your preparation, you knew that people were coming, heading towards Parliament Hill. How did you prepare? Who did you collaborate with the other police services, with the government, with the city, etc.? And how did you prepare to deal with this convoy as it headed to Ottawa? And I'd like to direct that question to Mr. Bell initially.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One of the things that I think is really important to highlight as the police jurisdiction in Ottawa is that on a yearly basis, we deal with hundreds of demonstrations. It is, as the seat of Parliament for the nation, as the police jurisdiction in that nation's capital, it is what we do. On a daily basis, we manage, support, liaise, and work with protesters and demonstrators in our jurisdiction for them to engage in their lawful right to have their voices heard. This circumstance was unprecedented to any of those other circumstances that we'd seen previously. We'd had on previous occasions within the last six months prior to this, we'd had several demonstrations that were centered around vehicles attending our jurisdiction to have their voices heard. All of the past history that we had was around people attending, having their voices heard, and then leaving, as is their constitutional right. We prepare, we support, and we work with protesters to look at how we best manage their safety and the safety of the community. What I can tell you is, as this built, as this moved across the country, and as it ultimately settled down into our jurisdiction, ultimately occupying our streets, this grew to be a very different circumstances from any other protest that we had managed in the past, any other demonstration that we had managed in the past. The very outcome of it identifies how different it was. Last year during our protests, we had under 5 arrests associated with demonstrations and demonstration activity. In this protest, we had 280 arrests that resulted in hundreds and hundreds of criminal charges. That is not the circumstances that existed prior to this demonstration occupying our streets.
Si je peux me permettre, Monsieur Bell, j'ai pas beaucoup.
If I may, Mr. Bell, I don't have a lot of time. I'd like to go back to the initial question. Now, you said in your opening remarks that the intention was to disrupt public order, to disrupt the downtown core. There were signs of hate. Now that this is, you said that it's something you've never seen before, but we're seeing things outside Parliament, people who want to be heard. But in this case, there were people who planned to stay there, and they publicly stated to the media, we will not be leaving until we get what we want. So we could see the intention that was to take it farther. So how did you prepare for that? It seems to me that it grew in scope significantly at one point, and the city of Ottawa, someone signed a letter, in fact, and sent it to the Prime Minister and said from the police service saying that there was a need for an extra 1,800 police officers, and that could have perhaps helped you to act more quickly. But how did you prepare? When you asked for assistance, were your calls for assistance heard?
So I think you've identified scope and scale. That is a very important factor that plays in this. The original intelligence that we had a much smaller footprint of the people who were what I would call motivated to stay for longer periods of time. What ultimately ended up on our streets in terms of scope and scale, geographical footprint, was not consistent with what we believed or what we believed to have intended to occur. Beyond that, the activities that were engaged by the protesters were not what we believed would occur. Were not consistent with previous demonstrations that had occurred in our streets. The hate, the disruptive behavior, the intimidating behavior, the noise pollution that terrorized 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, our communities, was nothing that was indicated to have occurred before. You mentioned the preparations of other jurisdictions. What I can tell you is, through conversations with many other chiefs of police that continue to be ongoing now, much was learned from what occurred in Ottawa.
Thank you.
Chief Raymer from Toronto clearly
Thank you very much.
indicated.
Sorry, Interim Chief, we're out of time on that block. I'd like to turn now to Mr. McGregor. Sir, you have 6 minutes. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Chair. Chief Bell, I'm going to continue with you. Your opening remarks quite skillfully and completely deconstructed the narrative that this was a peaceful protest. So I appreciate you providing Ottawa Police Service's perspective on what your officers were dealing with. But I want to go through this timeline because, you know, the protest started arriving, the convoy arrived in Ottawa on the weekend of January the 28th. February the 6th, we had Ottawa declare a local state of emergency, followed by February the 11th, where the province of Ontario followed suit. And then February 14th, the federal state of emergency. With the two previous states of emergency, both Ottawa and the province of Ontario, there have been a lot of questions asked as to why existing laws were not sufficient to deal with this protest. Like, why did we get to the point on February the 14th where federal powers were necessary? Can you please explain to the committee why a local state of emergency and then a provincial state of emergency were not enough to deal with the occupation of Ottawa?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. As I indicated in my statement, and as Commissioner Carrique reiterated in his opening statement, there were several factors and several pieces that needed to come into play for us to be able to successfully and safely end the occupations of our streets. One of those pieces was the injunctions leveled within the city of Ottawa. Another piece was the provincial state of emergency and emergencies act that were implemented. Final piece to that was the Emergencies Act. They all provided different components and legislation and tools for us that were utilized to ultimately and successfully take down the demonstration that was occurring. Beyond the tools we had, we needed to amass the resources. We did ultimately have just shy of 2,000 members, police members, attend our city streets in order to be able to successfully dismantle this. So we needed not only tools, we needed resources, we needed the plan. That all culminated in the ultimate takedown that you were able to witness.
I think that residents of Ottawa, they still have a lot of questions about their police service and the actions that led up to the declaration of emergency. What do you say? You know, we had media reports. We saw pictures of police officers standing by while people were carting jerry cans of diesel fuel. And a lot of residents rightfully have questions as to why those officers were not enforcing the law at that time. Can you provide some illumination as to why that did not occur?
So, Mr. Chair, I'll concur at the very beginning. There are residents of our city do have questions about our activities as we led up to this. I have questions about our activities leading up to this. That's why discussions like these, the internal review that's going to be done by the City of Ottawa, are so important. We need to learn from these circumstances. We need to make sure that something like this never replicates again. This was an unprecedented, unseen event for any jurisdiction across Canada. The members of our police service, our unified command team between the RCMP and the OPP, were dealing with a situation that had never been tackled, had never been approached before. We went through a series of methodical planning, went through a series of resource gathering, and ultimately utilizing the tools that were presented to us in order to safely take down this demonstration and the illegal occupation of our streets. There was many questions.
Can I just need to interject. Sorry, I have limited time here. I just want very quickly from you, on what date did you feel that the protest had moved into an illegal occupation?
So as I indicated, as the protest grew in scope and scale, and as we observed the activities of the members, it turned from what would have been a demonstration to an illegal occupation very early in the stage.
So very early. Okay, and so very early. So there are reports that some members of the Ottawa Police Services donated funds through Give, Send, Go to contribute to the illegal occupation. Police officers are necessarily held to a higher standard because of the role they play in our society. So, I mean, what does it say when we have police officers funding an occupation that is actively undermining the residents' right to peace and security and the ability to go about their daily business?
Mr. Chair, that is an extremely important question, and one that has been asked of me many times, and I've been very clear around that. People that support, members that support this activity do not share the values of this organization, and we have already commenced and initiated investigations that will look to fully discipline within our authorities any misconduct that's identified. But I also think it's really important to balance that. The vast majority of the members of this police service, the members of the OPP and the RCMP, and every police member that attended our city did it with the values that we hold and share to make sure that these illegal activities and occupation of our streets were removed so that the streets could be given back to our citizens. I
Thank
think
you very
that
much.
is the important thing to focus on.
Thank you very much, Chief, and thank you, Mr. McGregor. We'll now move into the second round of questions. That begins with Mr. Brock, who will have 5 minutes. Sir, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for your presence today and your testimony. Largely, my questions will be directed towards Interim Chief Bell. Interim Chief Bell, just a little bit of background. We know that there were a number of other similar-based protests around this country. We know there was a border dispute in Alberta, a border dispute in Manitoba, and a border dispute at the Windsor Ambassador Bridge. And you'll agree with me, officer, that those disputes were all resolved, removed, and charges laid without the invocation of the Emergencies Act. Yes or no?
Mr. Chair, I would debate the definition of similar. Border protests in unresidential areas are considerably different than an occupation of what amassed to approximately 20 square blocks in the center of a major municipality within the country, in front of a parliament who had to suspend sitting for a period of time so that the police operations could be undertaken. The characterization of the other three demonstrations and where they were situated, as well as scope and scale, I don't think is comparable to what happened within the streets of Ottawa.
And you'd also agree with me, officer, that before the invocation of the Emergencies Act, and in fact, part of the wording of the statute is that the invocation can only take place where there are no other existing laws in Canada to remove the nuisance or dispute. You'd agree with me in these circumstances, there were a myriad of criminal code charges, Highway Traffic Act charges, City of Ottawa municipal bylaws, as well as several Superior Court orders that could have been utilized by the rank and file of the Ottawa Police Service, but there were no charges laid before the invocation of the Emergencies Act. Do you agree with that, officer, or not?
I do not. And I do not because there was several criminal charges laid in the course of our enforcement through the process of stabilizing, maintaining, and ultimately removing the demonstrators from our streets. The Emergency Act...
Sorry to interrupt. Was that before or after the invocation of the Act?
There were criminal charges laid prior to the invocation of the Emergencies Act.
Okay. And what charges were they? Were they criminal code charges?
Absolutely. There was criminal code charges related to activities surrounding the demonstration.
You mentioned racing dangerously around the city core. Those laws exist under the Highway Traffic Act, and presumably that wasn't simply a report that was generated to the Ottawa Police Services, but your rank and file, hundreds and hundreds of rank and file Ottawa Police Service members were able to witness that dangerous behavior, and yet no charges were laid in relation to that conduct. You'd agree with me?
So as I indicated in my opening, the Emergencies Act was one of the tools that we utilized. What specifically it provided us was the ability to create an exclusionary zone. One of the major issues that we had in trying to manage and maintain was the free flow of people in and out of the demonstration footprint, the red zone as we called it. And,
well, I get
and
that.
our ability
Chief Bell,
to properly enforce...
Chief Bell, thank you. I've got a limited amount of time. That does not answer my question. My question is, there were a number of highway Highway Traffic Act infractions and criminal code violations being conducted in the presence of police officers where no charges were laid. What direction did leadership give to the rank and file to turn a blind eye to this illegal behavior that only became necessary in terms of exercising your duty as a police officer after the invocation of the Act?
You've got 15 seconds, Chief.
So there was no direction to disregard criminal activity or Highway Traffic Act activity. In fact, what we have done is gathered information, intelligence, and we continue to do investigations around that very activity you're discussing. What was paramount for us was the safety of the community, the safety of our officers, and the safety of the demonstrators. And
Thank
on
you.
several occasions,
Thank you very much.
safety was
Sorry,
followed.
I'm sorry for interrupting. It's not the best part of my job, but it's an important part. Okay, now we turn to Mr. Nakvi, who has 5 minutes, I believe, joining us remotely. Mr. Nakvi?
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I hope you can hear me clearly.
Yes, fine.
Great, thank you, sir. Thank you to all the officers who are here today. I'm going to be focusing my questions to Interim Chief Bell. Chief Bell, thank you for being here and being so forthcoming and answering questions. I'm going to be asking some really basic fact-based questions that I'm hearing directly from the community that I represent. As you know, I represent Ottawa Centre, that was the ground zero of this illegal occupation, and the questions that I think you've been being asked as well by citizens of our community. Let me start by asking you this question: is it the general practice for Ottawa Police to let vehicles park on Wellington Street?
Mr. Chair, as I indicated in an earlier answer, at various times as it relates to different protests that have occurred in the past and in the very near past, provisions are made to allow vehicles into that area to have their voices heard, and they then leave at the end of that.
But have we in the past for various protests, and you rightly mentioned we get protests often around parliamentary precinct. Have we allowed for cranes to be mounted right in front of Parliament Hill?
Sorry, Mr. Chair, if it's specifically relating to the fact, do we allow cranes and do we manage the access to that? Yes, absolutely. That is one of the functions of the Ottawa Police Service.
So we don't allow those type of equipment as part of a protest to be stationed on Wellington Street.
Mr. Chair, I think it depends on the context of the protest. We as a police service, attempt to facilitate the lawful right to people have their voices heard. There are many different communities that we have facilitated that ability in different ways in the past. In the past summer, we had a farmers' protest that had dozens of tractors occupy that same area. In the past, we've had trucking association demonstrations that have had vehicles come, park in that area, drive around in different areas, get their message across, and then ultimately leave the jurisdiction, as is the course of a normal protest.
Chief Bell, it was highly unusual. I've seen a lot of those protests as well. It was highly unusual to see a crane right in front of the Privy Council in the Prime Minister's office. Let me ask you this question: did this protest had a permit to hold a protest at Parliament Hill?
So as the police jurisdiction for Ottawa, we would not provide permits for people to protest within the parliamentary precinct. That's not within our area of jurisdiction. We would be able, and not ourselves, but us through our city partners, be able to issue permits for demonstrations and protests that were to occur within our city streets. I could tell you, as a result of the ongoing pandemic, those permits have been suspended. So any protest within the time span of the pandemic has not received a permit because they have not been sanctioned by the city.
Thank you. The protest started around January 28th. After the first weekend, just around February 1st, 2nd, Tuesday or Wednesday, I recall seeing a news release from Ottawa Police that clearly said that there's about 2 to 250 protesters left with a couple of hundred of vehicles. Why did not Ottawa Police at that time, and have you stated that few laws were being broken, move in and enforce the existing laws at their disposal to remove the occupiers?
As I indicated before, I think it's important to understand the scope, scale, and magnitude of the operation we undertook. I understand people have witnessed and observed how many police officers it took to come here, the amendments of powers that we needed in order to be able to create a safe environment in order to begin that operation. That took time as it moved through. The numbers of people involved in the protest site fluctuated, but the number of vehicles did not dramatically fluctuate. And the vehicles were an impediment to
10
us,
seconds,
a
Chief.
concern,
10
and
seconds.
something that was different for us in dealing with.
But Chief, in the eventual
Sorry, we're out of time.
operation, you
Mr.
removed
Nakvi,
people
I'm
first
sorry.
and then vehicles.
Mr. Nakvi, I'm sorry, you're out of time, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Have to move on. And we move to Ms. Michaud. You have all of 2.5 minutes. Make good use of it.
Je vais essayer, Monsieur le Président.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to go back to my discussion with Mr. Bell. Well, we talked about Quebec. He said perhaps they were more prepared because they've learned from what happened here in Ottawa. Now, clearly they were better prepared. The events showed that. But I'd like to look at how things unfolded. Now, here in Ottawa, apparently we needed the Emergency Measures Act in order to overcome the situation. But that didn't happen in Quebec City because the demonstrators weren't allowed to settle in. Now, at the Ambassador Bridge, when they tried to settle in, police officers were able to remove them without the Emergency Measures Act. So this takes me back to my question earlier. When you asked for reinforcements on the ground, was your request listened to, and if they had come in earlier, would have that helped?
Mr. Chair, as I indicated, many of the pieces that we needed to come together, and they ultimately came together that allowed for our dismantling of the operation. Those pieces included the amassing of the resources we required and the tools we needed to create the environment that we could undertake the operation to ultimately dismantle. Those are the timelines that we've identified, and those are the timelines that I've spoken about over the course of these questions.
J'ai l'impression que ces outils-là et ces ressources-là, ils auraient...
Well, it seems to me that the resources could have been used they didn't come from the Emergency Measures Act. If, for example, a car was parked, you could have ticketed it, had it towed away, physical barriers could have put up, streets could have been blocked off, we could have prevented cars from parking somewhere. Those are powers that already exist. So why weren't those used? Why didn't you use those? It seems to be that there was a change in mentality once the act came in, because prior to that, we saw police officers monitoring the demonstration as if it were just a regular demonstration, but it wasn't. But prior to the Emergency Measures Act, we didn't see officers trying to remove them. Why wasn't something done before to remove them, even if there were fewer resources?
Right.
The Emergency Measures
Sorry, we're
Act-
out of time, but I'm going to give you 10 seconds to answer that, please. 10 seconds.
10 seconds. The Emergency Measures Act specifically provide us authorities to utilize those officers who attended. It specifically provided us authorities to exclude vehicle and pedestrians from the area, authorities we did not have prior to it being invoked.
Thank you very much. And Mr. McGregor, over to you for 2.5 minutes. All yours.
Thank you, Chair. Chief Bell, the Integrated Terrorism Assessment Center in the week before the convoy arrived in Ottawa provided intelligence assessments that concluded that violent extremist groups were deeply involved in the protest movement. So then we have a convoy with that assessment arriving in our nation's capital, setting up on Wellington Street, right beside the Prime Minister's office, right beside the seat of our democracy. I mean, how did those assessments inform police behavior? I mean, that should have put you on high alert, even if what turned out afterwards was far from the assessment. That assessment alone should have put your police officers on high alert that something potentially could happen in a very bad way.
So what I could say is we were on high alert as an organization, and we thank our partners from the OPP and the RCMP who helped us actively gather intelligence throughout the build up to this and ultimately all the way throughout the occupation and ultimate takedown. We are actively now engaged in the reviews that identify what was the information we had, what were the courses that were taken, and how can we learn in order to be able to make sure something like this does not occur again. What I can tell you is the planning that we had done was exactly in line with protest planning that had been done in the past, and what we saw
Chief Bell,
in front
just
of
one
us
second.
was an extremely unprecedented occupation.
At the time, though, did you feel that that was a national security threat? When you received those assessments, did your police officers feel that that was a viable national security threat?
So I'm as the intelligence expert that we have with us, I'm actually going to turn this question over to Commissioner Karik to identify, as him and his organization were principal in gathering that intelligence. Commissioner Karik.
Thank you, Chief Bell. Through you, Mr. Chair, we did identify it as a threat to national security through the Provincial Operational Intelligence Bureau on or about the 7th of February.
Okay, thank you very much. Colleagues, we have two more questioners, but not sufficient time to give them the full allotment. So I'm going to ask Mr. Shipley and Mr. McKinnon to confine their periods to 3 each. Mr. Shipley, the floor is yours for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Very quickly to both Commissioner Karik and Interim Chief Bell. Were at any time during this protest you given any political direction from any level of government, be it your council or mayor, your board of police, or your provincial or federal jurisdictions?
I can answer first, Mr. Chair. Absolutely not. At no point in time did I receive any direction. I am solely responsible for the operations of the Ontario Provincial Police.
And I can concur with Commissioner Karik. I must make the statement, though, that I did not become chief of this operation until the 15th of February. And from that time moving forward, I've received no political direction or intonation around what I should do. We operate as an independent policing services under the oversight of our Police Services Board.
Thank you for that, and that's reassuring to know. Interim Chief Bell, it was a bad situation, quite frankly. I live, when I'm here in downtown Ottawa, I walked through this protest coming to work in the morning and night. And I was surprised, though, there was one particular night when I walked home with a colleague, and I'll admit, we took a little bit of a longer route just to kind of keep an eye and see what was going on and have a look at this as I had to walk through it. And that night, and it was probably about 9 o'clock at night or so, I did not see one single Ottawa police officer anywhere in the protest. Look, keeping an eye on anything. I have heard that perhaps absences were up at the beginning of this protest. Could you maybe give me some information as to why there wouldn't be any officers there and if absences were up at the beginning of this protest?
Mr. Chair, I can't comment specifically on what was observed because I'm unsure of the day and time exact date and time. What I can tell you is our members from across the country came together in force to actually help support the takedown of the occupation. It took a considerable amount of time to amass that number of resources. And in the early days of the demonstration, the illegal occupation, we indicated the resourcing pressures that we felt as an organization. We relied on the Ontario Provincial Police, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police to help support our operations. So although I can't comment on whether you saw an Ottawa police member in the crowd or not, what I can tell you is from the time that this started to ultimately the time it was taken down, police members monitored and actively worked to dismantle it.
Yeah, and thank you for that answer. I should have clarified. I didn't see any uniform members. I'm sure there was other members in and about there. My last question is then...
10 seconds, sir.
Oh, very quickly. I know Chief Slowly kept requesting the number of 1,800 officers. Was there a plan to use those 1,800 officers?
Absolutely. So the number 1,800 was built around a plan that ultimately we needed to build to monitor, maintain, stabilize, and ultimately dismantle. That's what we were able to amass around as the refined planning went
Thank
through.
you. Thank you very much. Okay, now for our last 3-minute slot, I understand I go to Mr. Zuberi.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'd like to thank all the witnesses for being here and doing your duty to protect and serve society. I'd like to double back on some remarks that have been made thus far. We heard from the OPP interim Chief Bell around that on Feb 7 you had intelligence saying that there was a national security threat. Was this national security threat related to far-right extremism? I'm not sure if you can hear me. I asked that my time be paused while the...
Chief, did you hear the question? Are you there?
So I'm sorry, my mistake. I believe that question was for Commissioner Creek around the intelligence.
No, for the Ottawa...
My apologies. So again, I will defer to Commissioner Creek around the intelligence. It was the OPP that led the intelligence efforts around this.
You could reply quickly. Was that related to far-right extremism? And we've
This is not the appropriate, sorry, Mr. Chair, this is not the appropriate venue to get into the specifics of intelligence. What I can tell you is the collection of intelligence right across this country with the simultaneous activities going on and the events in our nation's capital, we did identify collectively a risk to national security.
Thank you for confirming that. And we've spent about a minute or so, lost time due to lack of answers, so I asked for that back. Going back to the OPP, so there was a national security, real and live national security concern. You've said that Ottawa handles hundreds of protests every year. Were you in contact with the protest organizers in advance of the actual protest or convoy? And if so, did you try to prevent them from entering Wellington Street and the parliamentary precinct, the environ of the parliamentary precinct?
So I believe that question is for me, as I'm the one that stated we manage hundreds of protests. So we regularly and in all occasions attempt to make contact and liaise with the organizers. That's the important part of our police liaison teams.
Successful in making contact. Sorry, I'm just trying to ask a question. Were you successful in making contact with the protest organizers?
This was a difficult group to identify protest organizers within. It was a fractured, frayed group. We did make contact with several people.
Thank you. My time is very limited. I found the Facebook page of the convoy. It was developed as of Feb 14. The protest started on Jan 14. The protest started on January 22nd. Were you in contact with the protest organizers through information that they have made available through their Facebook page and other methods?
So again, the protest organizers were extremely difficult to identify because it was a very fractured, frayed group of people. Our police liaison team members did an amazing job in contacting as many different people that had identified themselves as organizers to start discussions.
Okay, thank you very much. I added extra time.
Point of order, Chair. Point
Point of order.
Just quickly, I was wondering through you if you could invite our witnesses to provide written briefs. They may not have been able to fully develop some of their answers during testimony, and I think written briefs from both departments would aid our committee in getting a fulsome picture of this.
Sure, I can make that request. I want to thank the witnesses for coming to appear in front of this committee at a very difficult time. The request has been made that if... Point of order, Mr. McKinnon?
Sorry to interrupt. During the course of this meeting, Mr. Lloyd has tweeted that Ottawa Interim Chief Bell confirms that no firearms were found during the clearing of the convoy protests. That's not the testimony I heard. I believe that mischaracterizes Chief Bell's testimony, and I would urge people to look at the actual testimony.
Yeah, we're not going to be debating tweets in front of the committee. However, I will ask the witnesses to feel free to give us more information if they had insufficient time to answer these questions fully. I would encourage them to do that. On behalf of the committee and in fact, and on behalf of the Parliament of Canada, I want to thank witnesses. I know how intense a time this has been for all of you. We appreciate you sharing your views and your perspectives for us. Thank you very much. Members of the committee, we will now suspend for 5 minutes, and we will return in camera. Thank you.